we understand that you have different individualized questions. So feel free to follow up with us at any time. And also, please, we can make this as interactive as you all would like. You're welcome to interrupt us at any time. So we're talking about the why and how of a stormwater utility today. Before I jump into that, just the School of Government, you all probably have utilized for lots of its resources, and that's where we live when we're actually in the building. We're at that Knapp Sanders building. Our center, the EFC, does applied research. We do a lot of teaching for local governments. We do teaching for students. We have master's and undergraduate classes at UNC that we teach. We work with systems to do actual program design and evaluation. We really try to figure out how to find the needs in the state, and then the resources we can provide for the communities to improve environmental services and financing those services. So that's our role, and that's basically where we are. And our catchphrase of "how you pay for it matters" sums it up really well. This is us, but you can see us on camera. So, but we would like to know a little bit more about you. If we can quickly go around, I know that you put your affiliation in the chat box, but if you could just, I can call on folks. If we can just give your name, your organization, your responsibility, whether you have a stormwater utility. Evan gave some good answers there. Yes, no, maybe, working on it, or never. What makes you proud and what keeps you up at night? If you want to add anything like that, just to get to know us a little bit, that's fine. So I will go ahead and start with Jessica, and I'm just going to go by who appears on my screen first. So Jessica?
Yeah, so I'm Jessica Trotman. I'm the planning director, and I think the de facto stormwater director for the town of Black Mountain. I recently, and actually in 2019, went to the stormwater finance workshop. And I was so excited afterwards. I stayed up till 3 o'clock that morning outlining a rate analysis. And then I spent most of 2020 marinating on it. And last week pitched the stormwater utility to our town council. I did the rate analysis, pulled everything together. It was a record-breaking 75 slides. And I think it went really well. I don't know what other choices we have. I think I'm really proud of the ability of my department and the departments I work with in the town to just figure out how to make this work on a shoestring at first, and being willing to kind of follow my lead on what I think is necessary, but also just a big leap for work and just responsibility. What keeps me up at night, this is really specific. We have a lot of our MS4 running under private property and no easements, and I really worry about people interfering with them, or if they were to be blocked and like somebody's house just falls into a massive sinkhole. It keeps me up a lot.
Rightfully so. Thank you, Jessica. And yes, we were excited to see you again after the workshop last time. So Jack?
Yeah, so I'm Jack Steinagle. I'm a student at the University of Minnesota studying urban and regional planning. I'm also currently working at the Department of Natural Resources in Iowa. So my responsibility is pretty flexible right now. So I don't know what city I'm going to end up in or whether they're going to have a stormwater utility, but I hope so. And then what makes me proud, I mean, I don't have a city to be proud of right now, except I'm in Minneapolis and there's a lot of good stuff happening here, but I'm not totally familiar with everything that's going on.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Jack, and welcome. Stuart?
I had to get my stuff on. Yeah, my name is Stuart Bass, and I'm with Land of Sky Regional Council. I'm working on some the state new zoning regulations, 160D requirements. But I'm also working with our Department of Aging, trying to manage some grants. So that's really been keeping me up at night here lately. And what makes me proud is I'm still here and have survived this past year. But in the past, I've been directly involved with stormwater. I've been a local government planner in North Carolina and a couple other states for a while. And so I guess most recently, I was planning director for Pittsburgh and had all sorts of issues associated with the Hall River and the Jordan Lake rules and that kind of fun stuff. So, you know, I'm familiar with it, but I haven't worked directly on stormwater for a while now. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. Yes, we know that area well. I live very close to Pittsburgh and Chapel Hill. So yeah, it's a lot. It's complicated stormwater mess here. Adrienne?
Hi, I'm Adrienne Eisenhower. I am with the town of Woodfin, planning director. We do not have a stormwater utility, but we did float the idea this year during budget discussions. It's not going to work out this year, but it may be something we look into in future years. What makes me proud is when I came into the town about 6 months ago, we were very non-compliant with the MS work permit in the state. So I've at least gotten the state to understand we're working on it. But what keeps me up at night is making sure that we become compliant in every facet of the stormwater permit that we have. So we still have a lot of work to do, but we're getting there.
Great. That's wonderful. And look forward to hearing if Woodfin is able to do that next year. Scott Adams?
Hi, I'm Scott Adams. I'm also with Land of Sky Regional Council, and I am the part-time zoning administrator for the town of Montreat, which is in eastern Buncombe County, immediately north of Black Mountain. The town is also an MS4 permittee, and I know in the past there's been some discussion of trying to do a stormwater utility, but I'm not quite sure what the conversation is now. What makes me proud? I guess keeping myself out of lawsuits. What keeps me up at night, staying out of lawsuits.
That makes sense. As an attorney, I can respect that. Eric Rufa?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Eric Rufa with the town of Fletcher. I'm the planning director and zoning administrator, but just kind of also the stormwater professional. Like so many, I think Jessica mentioned, I went to a state workshop in April 2019 and instantly entered a sheer state of terror and desperation that has kept me up at night on many occasions. So I've been talking a lot with Mary. We're on the, just the initial discussions on conceptualizing a stormwater utility, so just here to learn more about it. Just proud of the slow, steady growth that Fletcher's seeing, and glad we haven't had more projects that involve stormwater before we get our program fully off the ground. So, thanks.
Great, thank you. Haley?
Hey, I'm Haley Radcliffe. I'm with the town of Laurel Park. We're in Henderson County. We do have a stormwater utility that we implemented this year. It's our very first year of it. And I'm proud of our council for taking that initiative and implementing that. It's going to help out a lot with our projects and program. We are an MS4 community, and that is something that keeps me up at night, kind of like Woodfin. We're just trying to get into compliance. So.
Great, thank you. Stephen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Lapp. I'm with UNC-EFC as well. I do a lot of work with smaller systems around the country, and something that's excited me, mostly that's with wastewater utilities, but something that's been exciting is, I've heard more and more questions about stormwater related issues, and people are starting to think about that a lot more. So that's an exciting thing to me, and then I can pass them over to Evan and Aaron to help them get some better resources. So that's something that's exciting with my work.
Thank you, Stephen. And we're going to have some other trainings also that might apply for your communities beyond stormwater too, that Stephen will be helping with as well. So you may see him come again to Land of Sky. Mark? Okay. maybe Mark is not available. Amy?
I'm
Oh, there you
here.
go. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Sorry. Good morning, everybody. Just searching for my camera here. I got it back on. Mark Bieberdorf. I'm the town manager with the town of Fletcher. I've been here a long time, and our planning department has done I would say, good job. Eric, thanks for keeping up with all of this over the years, but we know this continues to become more of a challenge to be compliant with phase 2 requirements and this MS4 permitting. I'm interested in learning more about what's all involved with creating a stormwater utility. I don't think we're ready for that yet, but we need to get in a place where we're much more knowledgeable about it and can kind of analyze, do we need to move to that place? So we have a lot going on with this new MS4 permit, and we've got some good help from Land to Sky and our engineering consultant. And so I'm proud that we've been able to keep up with this. I know a lot's changing, and it doesn't keep me up at night because Eric has stayed up at night enough for all of us here. So thank you, Eric, for doing that. We'll see how much this is going to cost us. I guess that's one thing that concerns me, and the level of responsibility that we have to remain compliant and do a good job with stormwater services. So thanks.
Thank you, Mark, and Eric for helping Mark. And Amy, I think you're our last one.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? I want to make sure. Okay. I'm Amy Deaton with the City of Asheville. I'm the interim Stormwater Division Manager. We currently have that position posted and are trying to fill that position. And once I'm out of that role, I will go back to being the Assistant Director of Public Works. We do have a stormwater utility. We have had one probably since, I can't remember, 2006, 2007 timeframe, right when the permanent rules went into effect, and we actually had an ordinance. At that time, we had a flat rate, and I think back in 2014 is when we went to a tiered rate structure. What makes me proud? I think we do a lot of really good work that gets overlooked. I don't know if most of you realize this, but stormwater is for us, stormwater is one of the last things that is thought about. But it is one of the most expensive parts of a capital project. We consider it the foundation of anything you build. If you build on top of something, you've got to make sure your pipes are in good condition. You've got adequate drainage. And that's just a lot of times not even thought about, and including water quality. Like what is this project doing to water quality? But I think that we do, like I said, we do a lot of really good work that is just overlooked because a lot of times it's buried. And with your water quality measures, if they look good and they fit within the environment, they're not even noticed. The other thing that makes me proud is that we have a lot of good people that work in the stormwater division. So I know they're not on here, but I do want to give them a shout out. They work really hard to do a good job. What keeps me up at night? There's a lot. We do have the utility fee, but here lately and just in the past year, that fee and our revenues have been stretched to the max. I really don't know this coming year how we are going to pay for things. Capital projects get more and more expensive. The work that we are required to do, it gets more and more. Most of y'all, if you've gone through the MPDS audit, we came out okay. We had improvements that we needed to make, but that also means that is additional work that we don't have anyone that can do it. So we're trying to figure out how we are going to meet those. I'm going to call them revised requirements of the permit. So that's keeping me up at night right now. I just don't know how we're going to do it all. Plus the fact that Asheville has a lot of old infrastructure, and we are still in a reactive mode. We are trying our best to get out in front of the pipes that we know are in bad condition, but sometimes we can't, and we don't know when the next sinkhole is coming. So that's a lot, but
no, thank you. We appreciate your thoughts, and I think if there's a room to share those concerns and things, this is the one to do it, because I know that a lot of folks feel the same. So we're here to talk today to hopefully provide some things that'll be helpful for you all at the place and the phases you're at with your stormwater utilities and your MS4 permits. I'm going to talk a little bit in the beginning, as it was Mary mentioned, I'm an attorney, or I focus on the legal part of things. That my background is that I'm an attorney. Evan is our technical person, so we'll be much more focused on the actual rate setting and the details with that. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the enabling statutes and legal nuances about the stormwater utilities themselves as public enterprises. Before I do that, I just wanted to give a quick summary of just a reminder of what we're dealing with as far as why we need to have these designated stormwater funds. It varies regionally in our state, as was mentioned by Stuart. Folks over here have a lot of different issues related to nutrient rules and things. But in general, we all have this federal regulation framework that's taking us to the MS4 piece, which is that amendment of the Clean Water Act in 1987, the Water Quality Act, which is what brought in the MS4 permit requirements. And so, as you know, phase 1 communities are the large ones, 100,000 or more population, and then the phase 2 are those less than 100,000, and then some other defined urban areas and these new expanding urban areas. What is required under MS4 and in your permit, the phase 2, as you also know, are usually the general NPDES permits through the state. But those 6 minimum control measures that we're talking about that are required for MS4, that are also required for some of the other regulations that you may be trying to comply with as well. And so you all, I feel like, are well versed in this, given that you were the first area of the state to be audited. So I won't spend time going through what those requirements are, but you have to comply with these for one thing. At the state, we have other regulations, nutrient management strategies, depending on where you are in the state, Jordan, Falls, Neuse, and others, which have other additional requirements similar in some ways to what you have to do for MS4. There's some overlap at times, but also some more implementation of BMPs, planning requirements, setback requirements for new development, and those sorts of things. And then if you're in a water supply watershed, there's also additional requirements that are required for, or that require setbacks, and which are going to be regulated at that local level in your jurisdiction. So you may have to be thinking about those compliance pieces as well. And then locally, you can have existing codes and laws for sort of the building and related to your land use, density and setback requirements or mitigation requirements. And then you also may have other contaminated or endangered sort of water bodies in your jurisdiction, which necessitate further stormwater measures related to that water contamination. And all of these are just the regulations that are separate from flooding or other quantity issues that you might experience that are also causing damage or challenges to your community and driving the need to invest in stormwater. These are, I'm talking to people who understand this a lot more, but it is helpful to just kind of think for a second about why it's so important to figure out where your funds for stormwater are coming from. So you have all these mandates that are unfunded. So that sort of brings us through to understanding that we have to spend money for stormwater. There's no question about it. And how are municipalities or counties or other local government units paying for these services if they don't have utilities? It's coming from the general fund, as those of you who don't have one know. And even for those of you who do have a stormwater utility, it's also probably still coming from the general fund in part. Fees are not necessarily structured to cover all of your costs. And so there's still a supplementing that goes on from that. So, but they do provide this dedicated source of revenue, and they can be proactive, and rather than just having to try to grab at that whatever funding you can get from the general fund to address the stormwater needs in a reactive way. And additionally, the way that they're structured in the public enterprise statutes, the money's not going to get taken out of the stormwater utility to be used for other things. So once you can build in that infrastructure of getting the funding in there, and you can start to figure out the ways that you're going to spend it for your costs to cover your services, it's protected, which can be a challenge for some other public enterprises in which funds can be pulled back out. I know it would be really nice if we could figure out how much it actually costs to comply with these regulations. And Evan and I have done a lot of brainstorming on this over the last couple of years. In particular, once we knew that the audits were coming for MS4 compliance, we really have had the question of, well, how much, if I just need to figure out I at least need this much to comply with my MS4 permit, then I can start there for a stormwater utility. We don't know exactly what the compliance cost is. And we've talked to some of the consulting firms in the state that do help with the audits, and it's very customized by the system. What we do know, though, are some estimates, what you can look at from some of the folks who are in compliance, or as they become in compliance, what it's costing them. We can do cost comparison across communities. We have some estimates that Evan's going to look at for just baseline operations for staffing for a stormwater utility, for utilizing external consulting firms. We have the cost estimates for those, for rate studies, for what it might cost to put together a capital improvement plan, those sorts of things. We have estimates, which give ballpark figures. And obviously there's also a lot of estimates for the cost of specific infrastructure you may put in your community. So different BMPs or stormwater control measures, what it may cost for that. We have estimates for that. We have estimates for the maintenance or the monitoring. So we can look at those things and start to figure out some general parameters of cost that we need to be ballparking for in what we need for revenue. And then we can also look across the state. Evan is going to show our dashboard in a little bit to see what everyone in the state is charging for stormwater fees, and look at the community and identify how much are they charging, and talk to the community. How much are they subsidizing from their general fund? What is their revenue that they have, and is it sufficient for regulations and compliance? So, you know, one of the messages we have is just to talk to your neighbors, talk to your similarly situated utilities that are subject to those different regulations that are similar, to look for examples when you're trying to generate that number of what you want to dedicate for stormwater as a starting point. So you can see here, as far as across the state, the communities that have MS4 permits, the ones that have stormwater fees are the black boxes, and you can still see that there's quite a few white boxes, a lot in the West, that do not yet have a stormwater fee, but are subject to the MS4 permit requirements. So just thinking, like, we know that there's at least the requirement for them to comply, and there's going to be costs associated with that. So that funding has to be coming from somewhere. So we're talking today about kind of the benefit of having that stormwater fee, or increasing that stormwater fee, or potentially restructuring that stormwater fee if you need to be generating more revenue, so that you can at least have that for the compliance piece of your MS4. And I'm going to let Evan touch on this. He and another one of our students went through all the audits that have thus far been done by the state and pulled together some information. And so Evan, did you want to just touch on land to sky communities?
I just wanted to lay out, everyone pretty much understands, besides maybe a graduate student from Minnesota, and if the folks from Texas are here, kind of the layout of these 4 counties. There are, your website says 15, Mary, but I counted 16 municipality members. And I believe 8 have MS4 permits. And this is out of date because Haley told us that Laurel Park has a stormwater fee. But this is as of 2020. There are 8 MS4 permits and just 2 stormwater fees. And now there are 3, so that's excellent. And then Black Mountain's on the way. The permit audits, 6 of the 8 have been audited so far. one was very close to compliance. 5 of the 6 were out of compliance. So it's no secret in this region that that staffing, funding, and just general bandwidth is needed to help comply with the MS4 permit. But there are folks in this room that aren't MS4 permit holders, and maybe in the discussion afterwards, but certainly there are many reasons why you would benefit from stormwater fee without an MS4 permit as being one of the drivers. So I'd like to hear a little bit in the discussion that follows this presentation about kind of what your interest is in a stormwater utility.
Great, thank you, Evan. So we just wanted to give this region at a glance to kind of remember how much MS4 is linked with utility fee or not for you all. But going to talk about sort of the statutory authority for setting up the public enterprise stormwater utility. We have this slide, which may seem absurd based on the discussion and introductions you all already did, but for a while, it seemed like the ship had sailed with setting up stormwater utilities, and that those systems in the state that were going to set them up had already done so. And so it was like there was a slowdown. That's picked up significantly, and Evan and I realize now that ship has not sailed, and that there's lots of systems that we're talking with quite regularly that are setting up new stormwater utilities. The statutes that provide for you to set up the stormwater utility are in the Public Enterprises 160A chapter, and you can see that this is the way that the language is written. The stormwater utility is actually a stormwater management program, and it has the design to do all of these things for level of pollutants, stormwater structural. It's pretty broad as far as what you can do with your stormwater utility. This is where it's found, and it was a newer added public enterprise, as you probably know as well. So, but it's in the same statutes with water, wastewater, airports, those sorts of solid waste, those sorts of public enterprises, although it is structured a little bit different. This is the statute to provide for financing. One of the things to note from this that's helpful is that it allows for you to use debt to fund your stormwater public enterprise. So even though a lot of you are probably not at the place of considering taking on debt at this point, and you're just trying to figure out, let's just start with a fee and get there, it's allowed in this statute, and we're seeing more and more systems across the state starting to access debt financing, either general revenue bonds or SRF funds at times, although that's harder to get. Hendersonville, it's not on here today, is one of the recipients of some SRF funds that ended up getting used on projects for stormwater, which we were really excited about. But you can use tax revenue for stormwater, and then obviously you can charge rates, your stormwater fees. So the rate statutes are the same as far as providing the same sorts of limitations that you have for your water wastewater enterprises in your jurisdiction. Same thing, you can't have you can vary classes of service, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can vary your fees, but in general, they can't be arbitrary, they have to be non-discriminatory, you have to be consistent across. So the big provisions and limitations for charging with your stormwater fees, that first, they cannot exceed the cost of providing service. We'll talk about how you can set your fees and how those rates can be set with certain service characteristics. But in general, this comes into play a little bit when we'll talk about the credits that you can provide, which Mary mentioned, as well as thinking about the planning for capital improvement later, how much money can sit in your balance, and those sorts of things. So just understanding that provision applies, and justifying, if you were audited, that the costs that you have in there are going to be used for service provision for stormwater services is important to understand. The second piece is that you can work regionally together, and so you can decide together that you're going to operate a regional stormwater program, but you only can charge one fee within that county to do that sort of regional program. So the largest regional program that we can see is like Charlotte-Mecklenburg County is a regionalized stormwater program, but that's one distinction Chapel Hill and Carborough can't both charge a fee and then work together to do a joint stormwater management program. And then, like I said, they cannot be arbitrary. That's pretty consistent across everything for local government rates and fees.
Aaron, I just want to clarify there, they can't charge a fee in the same place. So if I am a household owner, I can't be charged a fee by both Chapel Hill and Orange County. So they can charge separate fees in their own jurisdictions and then work together on a regional program.
Right.
So I just wanted to be clear about that.
Yeah, you can't double dip, I should say. Sorry, thank you, Evan. The different options for the local governments that can institute stormwater fees, municipalities, it provides a statute specific for those. Counties, water and sewer authorities can, although there are not any in the state that currently operate a stormwater utility. And then you can do it through interlocal agreement. And interlocal agreements would broadly allow the for the either utility or either government, whatever both governments could do on their own, they can do together through an interlocal agreement if it's allowed. So you can provide some sort of a joint agreement again to provide regionalized service. This is a justifications. Evan will go into actually how to set your fees, but these are the things that you can use to set your fees and the distinctions you can make. That most of them are pretty clear. The municipal boundary is just the ability to charge a different inside or outside rate, which is again consistent in other sorts of public enterprise services. So we'll talk a little bit more specifically about how you would use these, but these are some of the characteristics to consider. The public hearing requirements for establishing your stormwater fee or revising it require this advertised public hearing. The requirement that it has to be in a paper of general circulation 7 days before the hearing. The hearing itself can be concurrent with that proposed budget ordinance. So you can share the hearing time, but the advertisement for the specific stormwater fee has to be separate and has distinct requirements within the statute. So just something to note that it has to be, you do need to advertise it separately, even if you're having it at your general budget meeting. Exceptions, waivers, and credits. So if you want to be able to provide a credit linked to the cost of providing service, it has to conform with variation guidance. So looking back at the statute that we just went up to, the different justifications for the charges and the how you're creating your fees, providing for credits is something that local governments might want to do to incentivize participation and incentivize more contributions to stormwater management by different citizens or businesses. But exemptions that are for factors that are not related to the stormwater costs are not allowed. I can't provide an exemption for something unrelated to the cost of my provision of service to that user. And additionally, when we're thinking about the stormwater credits themselves, if you're thinking about, for instance, the business owners and you want to have them, you want to provide a credit for on their stormwater fee for them to go above and beyond and do more than what they have to do for compliance. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about credit programs. You can't provide them credits for the things that they already have to do to comply with regulation. You want to have them going above and beyond and providing a credit program. The city of Raleigh has a pretty robust one, rainwater reward program, and looking at how you can incentivize customers to participate in the program is really important, and knowing how to get them on board, and then figuring out who the target is so that you can actually achieve what you want as a stormwater manager to actually accomplish some benefits for water quality is really important in these credit programs. I know Evan had something else to add to that, and while he's adding that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let Evan jump in and start sharing.
Yeah, I was just going to add that one of the things that we're finding, I'm administering a stormwater management survey for the state right now. And one of the things in the preliminary responses that we're finding is that there is a maximum credit that that some of the utilities set that a customer can achieve. So you might only be able to mitigate a maximum of, say, half your bill if you're a commercial customer. So thinking about that as well. So that way that entity will still be paying a stormwater fee going forward because some stormwater is still coming off their property in some way or another. Another thing you can think about when you're setting up your program is how you're going to bill for the provision of your service. And this this decision has very real impacts on your collection rate. This data is from a 2016 stormwater survey in Georgia, but I'm collecting similar data in North Carolina this year, showing that the property tax bill has the highest collection rate because folks perhaps don't actually look at the line items. Their mortgage lender might actually just pay the property tax bill for them. And then followed by utility, because the utility, you have some rights like the ability to shut off service if it's a water and wastewater utility, if they're not paying their stormwater bill. And then the standalone bill has the least collection, the lowest collection rate, which is still relatively high. I mean, we're in the 89%, but certainly 6-7% additional collection rate can make a large difference in your overall revenue collection. What should you charge and how should you charge it? And what I mean by how is how should your rate structure look? So I recommend that before you even go looking at what your rate structure will be, you look at what your revenue target is in the short term, and then in 5-10 years down the road. We have seen some utilities set a very low fee, in my opinion, too low, and then they get stuck there. There's a couple small towns more towards the east that set a fee. I'm talking $1 for all customers, no matter the customer class. And you can't really do a whole lot with that revenue. And we mentioned a city with a sophisticated stormwater program like Asheville is still feeling a crunch in their revenue, and their expenses are kind of going up while their revenue staying constant. I don't want you to get to that in your first year. So I want you to look at what your revenue goal might be for the first year and then set your fee accordingly. Don't set your fee and then work backwards to the revenue. And then you can decide on what your rate structure will be based off of stakeholder input. And I'll go over some different types of rate structures and how they look and what the effect is on the equity of the situation. So if you're contributing X amount of stormwater, you should pay for X amount of stormwater management, where for the general paying for stormwater expenses with the general fund, there's no correlation there between how much stormwater you're contributing to the system and how much you're paying for that management. And then reevaluate as regularly as possible. Some utilities have perhaps a set percentage increase in their bill every year. We see that more often in the water and wastewater world. I don't want you to get in a situation where you're behind on your revenue and then you're stuck because maybe something like COVID pops up, where now you can't raise your bill for over a year because of very real affordability concerns with your customers. But there are some utilities that perhaps if they were a little bit more proactive about reevaluating their revenues and expenses, they may have already gotten the revenue increase that they needed pre-COVID, and they wouldn't be in the situation they're in now. So what will your expenses be? What's that revenue goal that you need to set in year one? We see that a rate study, and the rate study, perhaps you could pay for it with general funds and then pay that back with utility revenue once your utility starts collecting revenue. But this is probably something that's going to be paid out of your general fund. We have seen one utility do that in-house. Carborough did theirs in-house, and it was sufficient. I do have an estimate from a utility that just got one done by a contractor, and they paid it's on an insignificant expense. And then staffing for a full-time stormwater director, you're looking at least 80,000 with benefits included, and then probably more 50,000 or so for additional staff. If you're working with Public Works to cost share some of the expenses of maintenance, then maybe a little bit less, because Public Works employees that are laborers might not make quite 50,000. You want to account for billing, supplies, and training. You want to account for equipment, and I've got an example of some equipment costs. For complying with the MS4 permit, one of the things that we've seen utilities, or not utilities, but local governments being out of compliance for with their MS4 permit is the map of their MS4, of their separate stormwater sewer system. That can range, according to 6 responses to my survey so far, from 5,000 to 125,000. I'm assuming that 5,000 cost was someone who had really good data already and just needed someone to tie up loose ends. I don't think that you can do a map of your MS4 from scratch for $5,000. It's a pretty extensive process. And then there are capital needs, which vary greatly, and especially the prioritization of those capital needs. When you first set your stormwater fee and you're looking at your expenses in year one, you're probably looking more at those failing culverts and addressing any potential sinkholes that may be coming about. You're not looking at putting in new green infrastructure downtown yet. So we see capital spending go up over time as a stormwater utility ages. So certainly in year one, you're probably not thinking too much about capital needs. And then there's maintenance, and the more capital you have, the more maintenance you have. But maintenance, you might also have a backlog of maintenance from years and years of not being able to spend what you want to spend because of general fund having other priorities. Looks like there was a chat. Staffing needs maybe more if looking at having licensed professional engineers. Yeah, this may be a lower estimate. 50,000 certainly isn't going to pay for someone who is a licensed engineer. So here's an example of a budget that was put together by a consultant for a small town of 3,500 people that's contiguous to a larger municipality. So it might be somewhat analogous to some of the folks that are in Buncombe County and Henderson County who are on this call. You can see that their salary grows pretty quickly in the first few years as they hire a couple more folks. They've budgeted for maintenance and repairs, which is a pretty low budget in my opinion, in year one, starting from the ground there. They've budgeted for training and supplies, and then they're paying back debt that I guess they already had on stormwater infrastructure. And then starting in year three, they start to put some money to capital outlay. That's not a whole lot of money, but it is something that maybe they could use to leverage debt, or they could save it up over time. One of the things that Kara Melanzi at the School of Government, an attorney in public utility finance, recommends is that when you are saving money for capital outlay, that you develop some sort of plan in how you might spend that money in the future. Otherwise, I don't know exactly what the details of that, the legality of it, but she just recommends that that you have a plan for that capital outlay to justify saving up a chunk of money. Moving on to what equipment expenses will look like. There are some specialized equipment items that you may need as a stormwater utility. Like a leaf vacuum is 100% a stormwater utility expense in this budget here. But some of the things you may be able to cost share, you may be able to share it with other departments within your city. You may be able to share it with neighbors through an interlocal agreement. And I highly recommend that you do that. So a backhoe, you're not going to be using that backhoe every day. You might only use it maybe a couple weeks out of the year. So someone else can use it in the other time. And it looks like for this town specifically, 60% of the time someone else is using it or has access to it. So they're only paying 40% of the cost of the backhoe. So keep that in mind. Be talking with your other departments, be talking with your neighbors about if they have need for that equipment, or if they have that equipment that perhaps you can help pay for and then have access for it in return. So what are rate structure options? So I'm going to go over some basic ones. Actually, I took tiered flat fee out of this because I can't calculate it easily on the fly. But I'm going to look at flat fee and a per ERU fee, and then some combination of the two in a second. So I thought that using kind of a fake town might be a good way to look at this. And certainly when I share the slides, and I can direct anyone to the paper that I used to do these calculations that actually use Roanoke and Blacksburg, Virginia as their case studies. Lauderdale, North Carolina, medium-sized town. It is bigger than a lot of the entities in this room in terms of the magnitude of our calculations in this example, but the actual method stays the same. We're going to evaluate stormwater fee structure. They've got the revenue target, and we're going to help them get to it, and then we're going to look at how the revenue is broken up by customer class based off of each calculation. And they want an equitable revenue generation. I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by equity in this example. So they have a $170,000 a month goal. Like I said, this is a higher magnitude than perhaps some of you would be shooting for, but the calculations will remain constant. There's 39,000 parcels, and it's broken up 29,000 residential, 10,000 non-residential. And as far as impervious surface area goes, only 82 million square feet is residential and 200 million is non-residential. So you have much more in terms of number residential properties, but non-residential makes up a much larger percentage of the total impervious surface area. So I'll look at how that matters to our calculations and how that matters to equity in these examples. So I'm going to use 4 customer types to show you how these calculations will influence their bills. And then we can talk a little bit about how that plays into the equity question. So we've got a lady living alone in a small, maybe very small home, 1,000 square feet of impervious. A typical household, maybe a little bit larger than your typical household, 3,000 square feet of impervious. McMansion, 10,000 square feet of impervious, and then a cafe who has a parking lot, 20,000 square feet. So the simplest way to do it, and perhaps not the best way to do it, is a flat fee for all customer classes. So how do you calculate that? Well, it's pretty simple. You've got your monthly revenue, and then you've got your total parcels. We don't care about non-residential versus residential in this calculation. And you just divide that, and then you get your price per parcel. So your flat fee for this example would be $4.39 per parcel to get to your revenue goal. What does that mean? It means all these customers are paying the same bill. Equity, probably not great. Business, are you fostering a friendly business environment? Yes. The cafe is not going to be driven out of town because you're charging them $4.39 a month. But on the far left side of the spectrum, you've got a lady who's perhaps living on a fixed income, who's paying the same as a cafe. Now, it's a very affordable bill for everyone, even those on a fixed income. $4.39 a month is probably not going to make or break anyone's budget. But when one customer is paying the same as a cafe, or get even bigger as an Ingles, or I tried to get regional for you guys here, then perhaps that's not as fair as we might want it to be. And it's not going to produce as much revenue as perhaps you would want as well. So all these customers are paying $4.39, while Ingles is paying $4.39. Ingles has a parking lot that can fit 300 cars, and they have a driveway that can only fit 2. So you can see where my bias lies. I hope that as you set up your fee, that you don't choose a flat fee for all properties. Another example is a flat fee by customer class. And this is a little bit more equitable. Certainly your residential customer is not paying the same as your commercial anymore, but the small commercial is paying the same as really large commercial. So maybe you've got a really large customer who's paying the same as like a really small restaurant. The bill itself is still small enough where it's not going to make or break anyone's budget, but the equity is still there, or the equity concern. So how do we calculate this? We need to know the ratio of non-residential to residential impervious area. And that ratio for this example is 2.41. And for folks who are like, I can't follow these calculations, these are too quick, we'll send Mary the slides, and like I said, I can point you to the paper that calculates these out for you. Residential rate, we're going to have the multiplier in times the non-residential parcels in the denominator. That will allow us to kind of make the values equal between the residential and the non-residential, and we add those together. So 2.41 times 9,000 is 28,995. And then we divide that, and we get a flat rate for the residential properties of 323. And then the non-residential flat rate is just the multiplier times the flat rate for residential. So 778. So this one's a little bit more equitable. But we still have, there's still some variation in the residential customer class. I mean, we saw that the impervious area for the McMansion is 10 times the impervious area for the small home with the single woman, and they're paying the same bill. As far as an order of magnitude, that's one order of magnitude, but the difference between a small commercial establishment and a large one might be 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. So having that flat fee for the commercial customers might be the issue here, not having this flat fee for the residential customers. And my last example will be a flat fee for residential and then a uniform fee for commercial. And I'll show you why that is the most chosen option in North Carolina.
Hey, Evan, I have just an interesting question that I thought you might want to address.
Sure.
Scott said these fees assume separate land uses. How would a fee be applied to a vertically mixed use building? Ground level office or retail, upper story residential? Is the default commercial rate applied assuming a higher percent impervious hardscape urban setting?
Yes, the default of commercial is very often applied to multifamily establishments. So when we're thinking residential, think about single family homes. Don't think about apartment buildings. Apartment buildings will be grouped into the non-residential customer class. That's a good point.
Evan, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question too. Just as we're thinking about this, it seems like, just the point you were making about the small home versus the McMansion, right? And the differences in imperviousness. Can some of the thinking about how to structure the fee be around kind of, if there's another goal you want to achieve, like getting them to reduce impervious surface and having a motivation for, and I guess that'll be the ERU maybe, or I don't know, where there's a kind of a background motivation to reduce your impervious surface because it will reduce the fee that you pay. And that impervious reduction is going to help us, reduce the amount of stormwater runoff that we have and improve our water quality. So I think kind of maybe you're going to address that, but it's on my mind as kind of another kind of motivation for why you would do a different fee structure.
So within the residential customer class, I don't think that you could charge a stormwater fee high enough that would actually incentivize that, because the cost of a rain garden is in a couple $1,000s. And
I was thinking about that too. Okay.
Yeah, but within the commercial customer class, I think we do see that incentivization a little bit, especially for your really large commercial entities. I'm talking like Walmart and bigger that have, over 100,000 square feet of impervious. And if they're paying a uniform fee of, $5 per 3,000 square feet, now we're talking hundreds or even over a couple $1,000s per month in bills. And they could quickly see a payback on their investment if they put in an additional stormwater control measure on their property above and beyond what's required by regulation.
Right.
So yeah, that's another thing too, is that if you don't charge your commercial customers a uniform fee, which I'll show you how we would do that, you're not going to get anyone to utilize your credit program. For residential properties, this is down the road. Maybe Asheville, Hendersonville are at the point where they could start thinking about it, but certainly the folks who are just getting started, Laurel Park, wouldn't be thinking about it. Raleigh has a cost share program for rainwater. They call it a rainwater rewards program, or for rain gardens, and they'll cover within some of their priority watersheds, they'll cover up to 90% of the cost of the rain garden. And then you also get a rebate on your stormwater fee. And so now the residential customer might only be responsible for 10%. So maybe they can actually see the payback on that sooner.
They can do more than rain gardens on that program. They can put in like pervious pavers and things like that. So just.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's extensive. They can put in rain barrels, pervious pavers, other things like that. It's a great program, and they're getting more use out of it because of the fact that the subsidization is so high. For most of the city, it's like 70%, but for the downtown core where they have a priority, it's like 90%. But that's something that you're not going to be doing in year one of your utility. You've got other priorities to look at. So an ERU is an equivalent residential unit. It's your average size of the impervious surface area on a residential parcel in your jurisdiction. We see it's about 2,800 to 3,200 square feet across the state, and it varies greatly. this is an example of sort of a uniform fee that isn't explicitly tied to an ERU. It's just per 1,000 square feet. But we see a yearly fee of $32.15 per 1,000 square feet of impervious, and that increases for all the customers. So this is every single customer in your jurisdiction pays a per ERU fee. The reason why this might not be the best approach is because you need to know the impervious surface area on every single parcel in your jurisdiction. And that changes over time. It can grow on some parcels, it can shrink on others, and people will be challenging their bill if they've just taken out a driveway or put in, maybe they won't challenge their bill if they put in something else. And so you'll be having to keep a database updated, and this takes administrative costs. But it is the most equitable in terms of you pay the same percentage of the total revenue for your utility that you're contributing in stormwater runoff based off of your impervious surface area. And I'll go over kind of what that means a little bit more. So what are some ways to calculate your ERU? You can do that comprehensive impervious surface area study. And this costs money. Like you got to hire, either you've got to have a great GIS database or some really high resolution photos and go in and actually draw polygons on all the parking lots and driveways and roofs and calculate the area on each parcel. Or you can take a small sample size of parcels in your jurisdiction at random and then just use that as your ERU. But if you're doing that, for residential, you can't charge residential customers a uniform fee because you don't know the impervious area on every single property. You only know for those 100 or larger residential properties. So, but you can charge a flat fee with that. So what type of fee structure would you use this for? Would you use the sample? Oh, sorry, I should have put this in the next slide, but you would use it for, I'll come back to this. You would use it for a flat fee for residential and a per ERU for non-residential. So let's go back to calculating the per ERU fee. So like I said, to calculate the ERU, either you would take that sample or you would take all your residential impervious area and divide it by the total number of residential parcels. And so for this town, it's 2,800 square feet of impervious, of impervious is your ERU. And then your total ERUs in your jurisdiction is all your impervious area divided by your ERU size. So that's both residential and non-residential impervious area. That for this jurisdiction is 99,000. So Scott said, so are single family detached property owners actually benefiting from a lower rate than it depends on how you set the structure, whether or not a single family property would be paying less than their fair share. So I'll go over that at the end. After all these examples, I'll lump multifamily into the non-residential category and talk about that explicitly. If an urban site, high impervious percentage, has lots of on-site stormwater treatment, is this a way to lessen fees paid on commercial sites with residential mixed use? Yes, this would be, you'd have to clarify that in a credit program and have a credit program manual. And we can point you to some credit program manual examples. We just have downloaded them from people's websites. And it would have to go above and beyond, as we've said a couple of times, the regulations that would already be required by your code. So if you require for new development, a lot of jurisdictions in the Piedmont require that new or redevelopment reduce the runoff on a property or not increase it, depending on what the jurisdiction is for a 1-inch storm. So if they are already meeting that and they do something additional, then they could potentially get credit for it if you have a credit program in place. So we've got the total ERUs for this town. Now we want to calculate the rate. So again, we have our monthly revenue. So we're on all these examples, we're working backwards from our targeted monthly revenue. We've got our total number of ERUs. So we divide those two, and we've got an ERU rate of $1.81. So already calculated the ERUs for you on each one of these examples. So the 1,000 square feet is 1,000 divided by 2,800 is 0.35. That's the number of ERUs on this lady's property. The slightly larger property is a little over 1 ERU. The McMansion is 3.5, and then the cafe is 7. What we have learned since doing this example is that most, if not all, of the jurisdictions in the state that charge an ERU fee do not prorate the ERU. So you basically get bumped up to the next ERU. So this lady would pay for 1 ERU, so she'd be paying $1.81. This house would now pay for 2 ERUs, so they'd be paying $1.81 times 2, $3.62. And then this house would pay for 4, and then the cafe would pay for 8. So we've learned that because you're not able to get down to the 5, 10, 15 square foot range when you're calculating in your engineering study. You're just going to put them kind of in a tier of rounded up to the next ERU. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not going to make a huge difference in someone's bill, but I think it makes your administration a little bit easier. So what's a combination of the flat fee and the per ERU fee? The way we see it is that you charge a flat fee for residential and a per ERU fee for non-residential. The justification for this is that, as I mentioned, the difference between the largest and the smallest residential property is only 1 order of magnitude. It's only 10 times. It's not a huge difference in variation, and that's the extremes. Most of your residential properties are concentrated around your ERU size, around your 3,000 square feet. So there's not a whole lot of variation in the residential property ERU sizes or impervious. So you can get away with charging a flat fee for residential and save on the administrative cost of calculating everyone's impervious and not have to do that initial study ahead of time. And you can use that sample of the random sample of residential properties to calculate your ERU. And then you would use that ERU to charge for non-residential customers. So here's an example. This is a phase 2 stormwater program. And they charge flat fee of $3, but then for non-residential customers, they charge $3 per 2,500 square feet of impervious. So how would we calculate that? We still need to find our rate. So we need to know the total number of non-residential ERUs and the total number of residential parcels. And our rate here is $1.73. Again, we're working backwards from monthly revenue targets. So our residential rate, flat fee, everyone, $1.73. And then since we have so much non-residential impervious, they're going to be paying a higher percentage of the total revenues than the other examples. So flat fee for all the residential customers, and then now their bill's higher, but not that much higher. But they are paying, as you remember in the other example where we had the flat fee by customer class, they were paying, for the per ERU, they were paying 7 something, and now they're paying 12 for the cafe. And again, this would be prorated, so it would have actually been bumped up to 8. This is okay, in my opinion. It's a good way to go about it. It's the most common way to go about it in North Carolina because you don't have a lot of variation in the residential customer class, but you do have a lot of variation in the non-residential. So here's the equity question. The total percentage of impervious surface area in this jurisdiction that was residential property is 29. The total percentage that was non-residential, including multifamily, is 70. If we're making the assumption, and it's a pretty good assumption, that the amount of stormwater that you're contributing to the stormwater system is proportional to the costs that the system is incurring because of you, then you should be paying the same total percentage revenue as you make up in percentage impervious surface area. So compare these numbers to these numbers up here. So for residential, for a flat fee for all customer classes, the they're paying 75% of the total revenue to your system, but they only make up 30% of the impervious surface area. So there's a disconnect there. They're not contributing that much to the system, but they're paying for a lot more than they're contributing. And then non-residential is getting essentially subsidized here. Flat fee by customer class, it's a little bit more equitable. It really isn't that close. We're not really that close to being equitable here. It's still more than, they're paying more than double of what they theoretically should based off of impervious surface area. For the per ERU, it's perfectly equitable, 100%. But there's administrative costs that come with it, like I mentioned. So it's more costly to implement this structure. And then for the flat fee for residential and the per ERU for non-residential, it's really close. We're talking, we're less than a percentage off for each one. So what's the benefit of this bottom one? Well, you don't have the administrative costs. That's a big one. And you're still getting really close to that equity of paying for what you're contributing. One thing that was brought up in one of our stormwater workshops is that residential property, especially suburban residential property, has a higher concentration of stormwater infrastructure per house in terms of culverts and curbs, and it's just a little bit more dense to pay for that infrastructure and maintain it for residential property. So perhaps the cost to service stormwater for residential properties is a little bit more than the actual impervious surface that they represent, because they just have more surface area that's going out to public infrastructure. So if you have a really big commercial property, there's only a little bit of public infrastructure that's touching the street compared to the total area on their parcel. Whereas for residential, every single one, they're not very wide and they're not very long. So there's more surface area that's touching public right of ways where you have stormwater infrastructure. Hope that made sense. So fee structures in North Carolina, what are your peers doing? I get to add Laurel Park to this map this year. There's plenty of examples, and you can actually see where I-40 goes in this map, and I-85. It's kind of neat. And there's lots out east that don't have MS4 permits that are charging a fee. They've got flooding concerns, quantity concerns. Most of the ones that are in the west and the Piedmont have some sort of regulatory obligation that it's correlated. I wouldn't say it's causation, but it's correlation. So as of 2020, and we're updating this year, we'll have more information for you in the fall. Had 93 fee structures in the state. Most of them were municipalities, a couple of them were counties. The reason why this doesn't add up, 81 plus 3 doesn't add up to 93, is because some of those counties had multiple fee structures based off of being inside and outside a certain watershed. The average fee, weighted average fee, this is brought up by Charlotte, that charges a slightly higher fee, but they have a higher level of service, $670 for 3,000 square feet of impervious. So that's kind of the ballpark of where it might be reasonable to be. I'll go over the dashboard here. This is a neat tool that you might be able to use to compare your fees to maybe your proposed or current fees to your peers. Asheville, I'm sorry that you're the default that comes up for this, so we can pick on someone else, maybe out a little bit further east. I don't like picking on people that are in the room. Oh, it didn't load. There we go. One thing that I'd like to point out for this is that I'd like for folks, when they're using this this tool, to use the comparison groups. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit just in case people are having trouble seeing. This comparison group feature allows you to compare to folks that have similar population sizes. So if you're a town that doesn't yet have a stormwater fee, pick a town that has a similar population to you, that has a similar regulatory mandate, and then look at their comparison group for what people are charging. Or has the same population as you. you have your monthly target and you want to get to the fee backwards. You want to start with your targeted revenue and work backwards. You also don't want to set your fee low and then not be able to raise it in the future for political reasons. Usually if you have the political support to get a fee in place, you should shoot for a more ambitious target that will actually allow you to do more with your program. And if you can justify that to your customers, what they're getting for the fee, you'll have a better chance of doing that. So the comparison group, you can compare to similar population. I think that's the main one. So as you see, Haw River even has a low fee for similar population. So we're comparing to now towns like Butner and Hillsborough and Nags Head instead of the Raleigh and Charlottes of the world are now out of this comparison group. Haw River is a pretty small town in Alamance County, I think about 15,000 people. So that's the main thing. You can compare based off of square feet of impervious, but this doesn't change a whole lot because a lot of these are flat fees for residential. And then you can normalize the revenue by population. So Haw River is only raising 25,000 a year in stormwater revenues. You can't do anything with that amount of revenue. And that's why I'm saying like you should set your fee a little bit higher to a point that you can actually do something with it. Zebulon is raising a little bit more. Bessemer City is raising quite a lot. They're in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area. And then if you normalize it by population, now we're looking at revenue per capita. And that might be something that, like Haw River, is still low for that. And the $100 range is relatively reasonable, is about where people are, $50 range maybe. And then Bessemer City's at $260. We can talk to them, see what they're doing. They might be doing some pretty cool things. When you see a utility that has a high fee and lots of revenue being generated, they might be doing things above and beyond just basic regulatory compliance. For example, we look at Charlotte, they're the Cadillac of stormwater programs in the state. They have a high fee, but they're doing floodplain buyout programs, and they're doing retrofits for homes and floodplains by raising them and letting water get through their crawl space, raising the AC units. They're doing greenways, doing some really cool stuff that a lot of small towns aren't even thinking about yet because they're rightfully, they've got a lot on their plate. And when you start your fee, you want to get in compliance with your MS4 permit. You want to fix the culvert that's been broken for a while, and that's okay. Like those are the things you should focus on now. Don't even think about these other things until later.
And then I think you raised a good point. If Charlotte is using it for flooding as well, I mean, a lot of our communities deal with flooding issues, and certainly stormwater runoff contributes to those. That may, and often the planning director is also the floodplain manager and the stormwater director. So I think, although it takes a little more effort at the beginning, I think combining at least those two topics, and yes, we've been thinking about as well at the regional council is a really good way to create some synergy. And hopefully in the long run, save yourself some time and energy if you're trying to tackle kind of two related problems at the same time. So I'm going to look at Charlotte's program in a lot more detail for all of my local government people to understand more about how they're doing that. And I'm happy to then have that discussion as well.
Definitely. And it's a good way to justify your cost to your constituents. Well, you don't have constituents because you're staff, but your elected officials will have to justify it. And we see that when you justify it, people are okay with it. When you in your stakeholder engagement meetings or your budget hearings, you have like pictures of your flooding downtown, and you say we're going to be working towards addressing that with our stormwater revenues in year 3 or year 4 or year 5. But first, we need to come into compliance with these things. That's a good way to do it, and people will get behind that. So I mentioned in North Carolina, most of the residential customers are flat fee, the blue. Most of the commercial are uniform, which is the per ERU. There's some tiered in there. Tiered's a little bit harder to calculate on the fly, but you can do it on a case-by-case basis. For tiered, you still need to know, for residential, you still need to know the impervious on everyone's property. So there's still that administrative cost of looking at that. What do fees look like in terms of magnitude? Most of the fees for 3,000 square feet of impervious for residential are kind of concentrated in the $4 to $5 range. So that's a pretty reasonable place to be. Like if you charge a fee, you know, even if you say we're going to charge $6 per month for 3,000 square feet, and your city council says, whoa, that's too high. You say, no, it's not too high. Like look at all our peers, they're charging that. So you can kind of use these guys as a scapegoat. Put the blame on them a little bit if you need to justify a higher fee to get to your revenue goals. Oh, I had the dashboard in two places. Neat. So trends we're seeing some new utilities like between 2019 and 2020. We had 7 new utilities. I think one of them was just one that I completely missed, but maybe 6 new utilities. And then one utility actually dissolved. I haven't talked to them yet. It's Newbern on the coast. I don't recommend dissolving your utility once you create it, because then if you have more spending in the future, more needs in the future, then you're going to have to maybe reincorporate it or reestablish it. I need to talk to them about what's going on over there, but they're still spending a significant amount on stormwater, and they're going to be dealing with some quantity challenges in the future. 12 utilities raised their fee in the last year between 2019 and 2020. So that's what I mentioned, when constantly be reevaluating your fee, and if it's not meeting your revenue goals, maybe you need to ask council to raise it in the next budget. One thing I want to mention that will help you justify your fee is once you start your program, have a plan to inventory your assets. You'll know what condition they're in, you'll know what your needs are, you'll be able to project out your needs and plan proactively, and you won't also have surprises happen. If you're able to, let's say you set your utility in for the first 5 years, you do 20% of your stormwater system with a camera, and you see what type of shape it's in, then you'll know where your problem areas are, and you'll be able to direct your spending there, and that'll save you money in the long run. Because you'll be able to know that, hey, this culvert down the road is under a right of way, and it's cracked and it might cave in at any point. That's one we need to replace first. Well, guess what? That's going to save you from the costs of the incurred costs of that culvert actually caving in. So I recommend that an asset management program is something that you have budgeted for from the ground. Like when you're getting started, have a plan to have an asset management plan in place, some sort of asset management plan. That way you can direct your spending where it needs to be, and also know what your total spending needs will be. So maybe you set your fee not knowing the condition of your assets, you pay for your asset management plan, and then in year 5, now you know what your total needs are, you know where your capital needs are, and now you can justify perhaps a fee increase to your council moving forward. So we see that we did a capstone survey. Capstone is an undergraduate research class at UNC. Aaron taught this capstone a couple semesters ago. We asked some programs in the, was it the Cape Fear, or is it the Tarpam?
I think it was both, actually.
Okay, yeah, so more coastal than certainly your region, but do you have an asset management plan? 7 of the 10 did, and 3 of the 10 did not. And we saw that having an asset management plan also allowed some of these utilities to have a capital improvement plan. So it was more likely that a utility had a capital improvement plan if they had an asset management plan. And that will allow them to justify saving money for capital improvements, but it'll also allow them to know years down the road, 5-10 years, what their spending needs are, and they'll be able to project that out and plan for it.
Evan, can I just jump in for a second? I just wanted to address, because I know the questions came up in the introduction, or a couple of you mentioned as far as things keeping up at night, has to do with the private property and the assets that are on private property without easements. So that's an open-ended kind of legal question right now that I'm actually working with Kara, and we're trying to figure out what kind of guidance or some options or solutions we could come up with that could help you all in addressing that, because it is a real challenge as far as what do you do when, you know, sinkhole arises? What do you do to prevent the sinkhole if you know that you can do that? What is your ability to go on that private property and then spend your funds on that private property? So I don't have an answer for you. I just wanted to make sure you knew I wasn't avoiding it or not answering it. don't have an answer for you yet. That came up at our stormwater class in December. And so it's been a priority for us to focus on at the SOG. So I think we can come back in touch and provide you with some resources as soon as we have an answer to that question. For now, I can tell you that there's a lot of systems that have come up with their own creative solutions for how they're addressing that. So again, talking to your neighbor who might be addressing it and seeing what they're doing is probably the best approach for now, and trusting your gut. We understand that preventing catastrophic damage is most important. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that while you were talking about assets, especially with asset management plans. I know it's kind of wishy-washy on what you do with the assets that are on private property. So just something to throw in there, Evan.
Yeah, and most of those examples involve getting an easement on the land in which the asset is under. That way you have access to it at all times. It's your infrastructure. So this is in another state, but in Arkansas, there's a utility called Hot Springs that does easements, and that they need the assurance that they're able to maintain their infrastructure. So that's one way to handle it potentially, but you should be talking with your city attorney, and we'll be coming back with some more coherent advice. And I'm not an attorney, so don't take that as advice. So like I said, understanding your needs is critical, and understanding your needs allows you to justify to your public when you need to increase your fees because of your costs are increasing. So if you're able to show your customers, I'm doing this and this and this with the fee, this is where your money's going, because a lot of times stormwater spending is abstract or underground, and so customers can't actually see what's happening. So if you're reporting back to them what's happening, maybe it's, we recommend that you have some sort of stakeholder engagement on an ongoing basis. So maybe you have a Twitter account for your stormwater, and you do some fun things. Also let your customers know when you're doing dye tests and why is my river green. Durham does that a lot. Or you can do some bill inserts, like maybe once a year you put a bill insert that says this is what we did this year. Just some ways to connect with your customers about what you're spending the money on will help with that public resistance. And we see that resistance is virtually non-existent in most utilities. The ones where you hear about the rain tax, and that's usually when the utility is first being proposed. And then once people hear about it a little bit, it's your usual suspects that come to the town hall every time and complain, that might be complaining about it. But in reality, the majority of your constituents are going to be pretty happy. And it allows you to be proactive, an asset management plan does, and plan for your capital improvements as well. So just one of the 5 utilities with a capital improvement plan reported not having an asset inventory. So they may have had a capital improvement plan that's more like a suite of maybe stream restoration projects that they've recognized that doesn't really have anything to do with their MS4. Certainly there are some capital projects that you can plan without knowing the condition of your assets, but do you really want to be prioritizing spending for capital improvements if you don't know about a huge backlog in asset rehabilitation that you need to create in the next few years? And I think the answer to that is probably no. So some drivers to asset management, it allows you to perhaps comply with regulation a little bit easier. An asset management plan combined with a map of your MS4, if you've got a map of your MS4 and an asset management plan, those tie in very closely together. There would just be some more things that go into the map of your MS4 that the asset management plan would add on. So maybe there would be some fields within each one of those entities that tells you the age of it and what condition it's in. So the regulation for the map of your MS4 doesn't require an asset management plan, but they can play together. It allows you to know the condition and plan for O&M needs. It allows you to provide a higher service level, so you're going to be more dependable. You're going to be reducing catastrophic failures of assets, and you're probably going to be more resilient to climate change and to increased flooding that isn't necessarily climate change related, but might be more related to just more development and more impervious surface area. So you'll be more resilient to that. And then you're going to be more cost efficient because you're going to be spending money in a more planned way. It's not going to be as ad hoc. You're not going to be spending money on this pipe that broke and this culvert that clogged. You're going to be spending money tomorrow. I know I'm spending money on this, and at the same time, I can have maybe water and sewer do this and this because I'm going to be digging the road up already. So talk to your other utility departments. If you've got same utilities in the public right of way, you need to update a culvert, but there's also water pipes down there that are 30 years old. That might be a good time for both of you to do the same thing, and maybe you can share the cost of tearing the street up and putting it back together. That might save you some money too. So I've got a call to action for you all. I've got a survey that I'll send to Mary for you to fill out. I emailed it to every single MS4 in the state, and hoping that I could get some feedback on that. It's for both local governments that have utilities and those that don't. And I'm just going to be using this to do a comprehensive report of what stormwater looks like in the state. And then it's going to help DEQ and the Division of Water Infrastructure perhaps provide funding in the future, but also maybe even provide funding for technical assistance. There's probably the ability in the future to use Clean Water State Revolving Fund monies to provide technical assistance to stormwater programs. That would be great. I can't promise that, but maybe we can provide enough information to show that there's a need for that. And EPA may create a separate revolving fund in the future that is stormwater specific. And at that point, if we recognize a need in this area for technical assistance, that could be one of the first things that sort of program would fund. So fill out this survey. It'll take probably, if you don't have a stormwater fee, it'll take probably 5 minutes. If you do have a stormwater fee, it might take 10 or 15. And you may have to ask people some questions. So I can also send Mary a Google Doc that has the questions laid out. That way you don't have to be going in and out of the Qualtrics survey. You can just print it out and send it around your departments and get some answers. So that'll be nice to get some folks in the Western region answering that survey. So we do have 25 minutes for questions. And I know Scott was putting a lot of questions in. If any of the local governments on the call have questions, we're here.
I'm going to add one thing before we open up to questions back to asset management and funding. We've been using 205J funding to cover stormwater inventories, so GIS-based stormwater inventories. We've done that for several communities. We can do it in that low price range, but I mean, for smaller communities like Montreat, Laurel Park, Black Mountain, obviously Asheville, we could not do for $8,000. But 205J funding has been very useful for that. And the current project that I'm working on, and it's covering Fletcher and Woodfin, also has an integrated document management, or an integrated inspection and maintenance kind of documentation system, mobile phone app enabled. And that's still under development, and Fletcher and Woodfin are my guinea pigs for that. But I do want to look at, retrofitting, for example, Black Mountain's inventory with that, because it's, the inventory itself is the same technology, and now it's just a matter of kind of joining the Survey 123 based mobile phone app. What we did not include in that, and that's something that I want to kind of revisit, I think, is we have condition, and of course, kind of an inspection schedule. We're working with an engineering firm on like exactly what that looks like, what those fields look like. But I don't think I have year, for example, in there. If we know the year built, sometimes the inventory's been there and nobody knows.
Right.
But we do have condition, and we do photos as a part of the standard inventory. We do a photo of the inlets and the outlets, pipe condition, pipe material. So I've seen the estimates from our engineering firms on those inventories, and I think they are actually way higher when you're looking at that kind of initial, what's the cost of all of this? They're way higher than they really need to be. I'll say that they do. It's pretty overblown, honestly, for what the communities need, I think, for managing that asset. But I just wanted everyone to know that we are working on that right now with, and Fletcher will be the first, and then Woodfin, and then I'd like to kind of retrofit, like I said, Black Mountain and the other inventories we've done. So that is a funding source that we do have available to us, 205J. It's not a ton of money, about 25,000 to 30,000 a year. So it's exciting to hear that there may be additional funding for technical assistance where we can support our programs. So I just wanted to add that as a part of your asset management portion of your presentation.
That's helpful, and I want to add that to our funding table for we have a funding table for water, wastewater, and a little bit of stormwater from the state of North Carolina.
I know the table. Yeah.
I don't know if 205J is on there.
Yeah, but it's been a really stable funding source for us.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah. So now, so enough of that, folks. I think y'all have addressed Scott's questions. I was monitoring that as well, but we'll just open this up to anyone that wants to